During my promotion party, my wife's lover accidentally sent me a picture of them together. She whispered. It was just one mistake. I smiled and replied. That's why I took your name off the house deed. She collapsed in tears as everyone watched. My boss asked. What's going on? I said. Just ending a chapter. I never thought my life would turn into a real-life soap opera. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, sharing my nightmare with the internet. But here we are. I'm a 42-year-old guy, and until recently, I thought I had it all. A great career, a beautiful wife, a nice home. My life wasn't perfect, but I was proud of how far I'd come. I worked my ass off for years to get where I am. Long nights, missed holidays, all in the name of securing a better future. And I thought I was building that future with someone who actually loved me. I was wrong. It all came crashing down on a night that should have been one of the best of my life. The night I was promoted to senior partner at my law firm. The firm threw a party to celebrate. It was at this swanky rooftop bar in downtown Chicago. The kind of place where drinks cost more than an entire meal at a normal restaurant. My colleagues, bosses, and close friends were there. My wife, Natalie, was right by my side, smiling and laughing like we were the perfect couple. I was in a damn good mood. I felt like all my sacrifices had finally paid off. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. But then it buzzed again. And again. I finally pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. Just one photo. When I opened it, my entire world stopped. It was Natalie. Naked. In bed. With another man. My hands started shaking. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I didn't recognize the bed. The sheets weren't ours. The pillows weren't ours. And then I saw him. His arm was wrapped around her. His face was reflected in a mirror behind them. It was Eric. I had to stare at the image for a second just to process it. Eric was one of the IT guys at my firm. I barely knew him. He was just some guy who fixed our computers when shit went wrong. But apparently he'd also been screwing my wife. Another message popped up. Shit. Wrong number. I swear to God, I almost laughed. He sent it to me by accident. Of all the numbers in the world, he sent that picture to me. My first instinct was to grab Natalie and make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, slid my phone back into my pocket, and looked at her. She was still talking, still smiling, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew. I walked over to her. She turned to me with that warm, loving expression I had seen 1,000 times before. It made me sick. I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. We need to talk. Her smile faded. What is it? Outside. Now. Her face shifted. Confusion, then concern. But she followed me. We stepped onto the balcony. The night air was cool, but my skin was burning. My heart was hammering in my chest. I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see the screen. She stared at it. Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Nate, I kept my voice even. Don't. Just don't. She swallowed hard. Her hands started to tremble. It was just one mistake, she whispered. I smiled. That's why I took your name off the house deed. Her whole body stiffened. What? I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a folded document. She took it with shaking hands and unfolded it. It was the updated house deed. And her name was nowhere on it. Her breath hitched. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, panicked. When did you? 3 months ago, I said. Had a feeling something was off. So I met with my lawyer. Made some changes. Now the house is mine. Tears welled up in her eyes. She shook her head. You can't do this. You already did this. I cut in. I'm just finishing it. Her face crumpled. She clutched the document like it physically hurt to hold. Behind us, the party was still going. Through the glass windows, I could see my boss and coworkers watching us. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what. Then my boss stepped outside. Nate? Everything okay? I turned to him and smiled. Just ending a chapter. Natalie let out a broken sob, and for the first time that night, I actually felt good. Natalie was shaking. She gripped the balcony railing like she needed it to keep from collapsing. Her eyes darted from me to the document in her hands, like she was hoping the words would change. She looked up, her lips trembling. Please, Nate. I swear, it didn't mean anything. I laughed. A real, bitter laugh. It didn't mean anything? I repeated, shaking my head. You're really gonna stand here and feed me that? She reached for my arm, but I took a step back. Wait, she said quickly. Let's Let's go home and talk. Not here. Please. Her voice was quiet, desperate. She wanted this conversation in private. No. She didn't get that. Not after this. I glanced through the glass doors of the rooftop bar. The entire party was still going, but people were sneaking glances at us, pretending not to be watching. My boss was still standing there, waiting for an answer. He glanced at Natalie, then back at me. Are you sure? I nodded. Yeah. It's just time for a change. His expression stayed neutral, but I knew he could smell the disaster in the air. He had been in this business long enough to know when someone's life was falling apart. Natalie turned back to me, her hands clenched into fists. You're not throwing away everything over one mistake. I tilted my head. I'm throwing it away. She swallowed. Tell me something, I said, voice low. How long? She didn't answer. How long? I repeated, sharper this time. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I already knew. It wasn't one mistake. That's not how this works. You don't just accidentally end up naked in a hotel room with some IT guy from your husband's law firm. I pulled my phone out, opened the messages, and scrolled up. I needed proof. And there it was. Eric had sent more than just that one photo. There were texts. Dozens of them. Flirty, dirty messages going back 6 months. I exhaled slowly through my nose. My fingers curled around my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. I turned the screen to her. 6 months. She flinched like I had hit her. Her hands flew up to her mouth. I nodded. Yeah. That's what I thought. Nate. I shoved the phone back in my pocket. Save it. I turned and walked back inside. I was done. She hesitated for a second before following me, still clutching the deed in her hand. Her breathing was ragged, like she was about to lose everything, which, to be fair, she was. The second we stepped inside, I felt the shift in the room. Conversations got quieter. People tried to look casual, but their eyes flicked toward us. I grabbed a whiskey from a passing waiter, took a slow sip, and forced myself to smile. Natalie grabbed my wrist. Nate, we need to go home. Now. I turned to her, expression calm. Why? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. She was afraid. Not of me, no, never of me. She was afraid because she had no idea how I was going to handle this. If I was already smart enough to take her name off the house, what else had I done? What else could I do? She needed me to leave. Because as long as we were at this party, she had no control. I took another sip of whiskey and shrugged. I'm fine right here. Her hands curled into fists. She turned and stormed toward the exit. She wasn't going to cause a scene here, she needed to get me alone first. I let her go. I had bigger things to deal with. Like Eric. I spotted him near the bar, completely unaware that his whole life was about to go up in flames. I smiled and started walking toward him. Eric was leaning against the bar, sipping a beer like he didn't have a care in the world. He had no idea. No idea that his little secret was now a public time bomb ticking down to detonation. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run colder. He wasn't alone. He was standing next to his fiancée. Yeah. Fiancée. A woman I had seen several times before. Her name was Jessica, and she was sweet, the kind of woman who made homemade cookies for the office during the holidays. The kind who gushed about wedding plans and how she couldn't believe she found someone as amazing as Eric. I stopped walking. I was about to ruin 2 lives. She had no clue that the man she was planning to spend forever with was screwing another man's wife. I stood there for a second, feeling the weight of it. I could have gone in guns blazing. I could have dragged Eric across the room by his collar and put him on blast in front of everyone. But that's what he deserved. Jessica? She deserved something else. So I turned around and walked away. Not yet. Instead, I found a quiet corner, pulled out my phone, and took a screenshot of the texts. I sent them to her. No message. No explanation. Just the truth. A few seconds later, I saw her phone buzz in her hand. She smiled, expecting it to be something normal, maybe a cute message from her cheating fiancé. Then she looked at the screen. Her smile vanished. I watched as her fingers moved over the screen, scrolling. I saw her eyes widen, her face pale, her whole body go rigid. Eric turned to her, confused. Hey, babe? What's wrong? She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her head, locked eyes with me from across the room, and I nodded. Her mouth opened slightly, realization hitting her like a train. Then boom. She threw her drink in his face. The entire bar froze. Eric jumped back, cursing, wiping whiskey out of his eyes. What the hell? Jessica was trembling. How long? She demanded. He blinked at her. What? She shoved her phone in his face. How long? His face dropped. That's when he knew. That's when everyone knew. People turned, watching. Conversation stopped. My boss, my colleagues, the wait staff, every single person at that party was now focused on one thing. The wreckage of Eric's double life. He stammered. Babe, I can explain. Jessica's voice cracked. You were screwing his wife? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My boss's eyebrows shot up. Someone gasped. Eric finally looked at me. His face was a mess of shock and panic. Nate. He started. Dude, this isn't what it looks like. I smiled. Took a sip of whiskey. I think it's exactly what it looks like. Jessica lost it. She started screaming, cursing, crying. Then she ripped the engagement ring off her finger and threw it at his chest. We're done, you piece of shit. The ring hit him and clattered onto the floor. She turned and stormed out. The bar was dead silent. Eric looked like he wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. His entire life had imploded in a matter of seconds. I tilted my head. Guess that was just one mistake too, huh? He exhaled sharply. You son of a b. But before he could finish, a voice cut through the silence. Natalie. She was back. And she wasn't alone. She was standing near the entrance, with my boss. And she looked furious. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. My boss gave me a hard look. Nate, can I speak with you for a second? People were staring. The tension was suffocating. I glanced at Natalie. She was clutching her purse, eyes sharp, like she had something to say. Something I wouldn't like. Eric had already been destroyed. Was I about to be next? Natalie's eyes locked onto mine. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven. The weight of the moment pressed down on the room, suffocating everything. My boss, standing beside her, had his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Something else was happening. The whispers around us grew louder. Jessica was gone, Eric looked like a ghost, and now all eyes were back on us. Nate, my boss said, his tone firm but quiet. We need to talk. Privately. Natalie glanced at me, her jaw clenched. Whatever she had told him, I knew it wasn't good. I kept my voice steady. What's this about? My boss inhaled slowly, like he was deciding how much to say in front of an audience. It's regarding the firm. Some concerns have come up. I blinked. The firm? That's when I noticed it. Natalie wasn't just angry. She was smug. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't here to beg or plead. She wasn't here to fix anything. She was here to bury me. Natalie turned to face the crowd, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I think everyone should know, she said, that Nate hasn't been completely honest about his career either. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. My boss sighed, rubbing his temple. I stiffened. What the hell are you talking about? Natalie reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of printed emails. Oh, this sneaky, conniving. Did you think I wouldn't notice? She hissed, stepping closer. Did you think I wouldn't put it together? You think you're so smart, Nate? So ahead of everyone? Well, guess what? She shoved the papers against my chest. I was watching you the whole time. I grabbed them, my eyes scanning the text. Then my stomach dropped. Shit. These weren't just emails. These were confidential work emails, ones that showed I had been secretly prepping my exit from the firm to join a competitor. My boss already knew, I could tell by the way he was looking at me. They had already talked. Natalie must have found these and ran straight to him. That was her revenge. Not just blowing up our marriage. Not just humiliating me. She wanted to take my career down with her. I clenched my jaw. Where did you get these? She smirked. You really should log out of your laptop when you leave it at home. Murmurs filled the air. My coworkers were stunned. Some were looking at me like I had just confessed to murder. One of the senior partners, Harris, stepped forward. Is this true? I forced myself to stay calm. I don't know what Natalie told you, but... My boss cut me off. I already saw the evidence, Nate. I've spoken to the board. My pulse thundered in my ears. She actually did it. She actually went to them. Natalie folded her arms, tilting her head. You weren't the only one making backup plans, honey. I exhaled sharply. You're unbelievable. She shrugged. Guess we're even now. The hell we were. Eric was still standing by the bar, soaked in whiskey, watching this whole thing unfold. And then, he did something incredibly stupid. He laughed. Not loudly, but enough. I turned, my entire body rigid. You think this is funny? I asked, my voice dangerously low. He smirked. I mean, a little. You thought you were gonna be the one screwing her over, and now. That was it. That was the moment I lost control. I didn't even think. I just swung. My fist connected with his jaw, and he stumbled back, crashing into the bar. Screams. Gasps. Glass shattered. Eric clutched his face, eyes wide in shock, blood trickling from his lip. Are you? He touched his mouth, looked at the blood, then lunged at me. We went down. Tables screeched. People scrambled away. Someone shouted for security. I barely felt the punches. I barely heard the chaos. Everything was pure, white-hot rage. Then, hands yanked me back. A bouncer dragged Eric away. Another pulled me toward the door. You're done, my boss said, shaking his head. Get out. I wiped my mouth, breathing hard. My hands were still clenched. Every muscle in my body was tight with fury. I turned to Natalie one last time. She was standing still, watching me, her face blank. But her eyes held something I never thought I'd see. Regret. Just a flicker. A flash of it. Like for one brief second, she realized she had taken things too far. Then it was gone. I laughed under my breath. You win, Nat. And I walked out. I spent the night in a hotel. I didn't check my phone. I didn't answer calls. I just sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling. By morning I had 3 missed calls from my lawyer. I called him back. She wants the house, he said immediately. She thinks she can negotiate. I let out a dry laugh. Not happening. She also wants to discuss financials. And she's saying you hit Eric first. Of course, she was. I ran a hand over my face. Tell her lawyer to go to hell. And then I hung up. By noon, the firm had officially terminated my partnership agreement. Natalie got what she wanted. She tore me down. But here's the thing. She forgot who she was dealing with. She thought she could take my house, my money, my reputation. But she underestimated one thing. I was a damn good lawyer. And I had been preparing for war. 2 days later she got served. A full lawsuit for breach of privacy, invasion of personal data, and defamation, all legally sound. Oh, and Eric? He got fired. Turns out using company devices to send nudes to a coworker's wife is frowned upon. As for me? I got an offer from a bigger firm. One that didn't give a damn about my old bosses. I left Chicago. Got a new place. A fresh start. And Natalie? She fought hard, but in the end, she lost everything. People ask if I regret it, if I regret how it all went down. The answer? Not for a damn second. She burned my world to the ground. So I made sure she had to live in the ashes. And I never looked back.